Thank you all for coming. I understand that we have questions. There's the bill, Bill 2491, regarding pesticides and genetically modified organisms. A lot of people in the community have questions about the bill, and we're going to have some hearings coming up. And a lot of people have questions, so thank you for coming and being willing to ask your questions and hear me talk a little bit about the bill, because I want people to understand how it works. And the biggest thing people ask me a lot of times is, well, how come you're doing this? Why are you doing this? And as a county council member, it's my job to look out for the interests of the community, both the environmental interest, health, economic. And about 8 months ago or a year ago, as I was going around the community, it became very clear that people are concerned about pesticides and they're concerned about GMOs. And so I started asking questions. And I couldn't get the answers, so I asked the seed companies, the big users of pesticides, what are you guys spraying? People are concerned, and unfortunately they wouldn't tell me. And the more I asked, the more information I didn't get, and so I started digging in deeper and became more and more concerned. The more I dug, the more concerned I got, and I finally got the information from the Department of Agriculture that 5 companies, the 4 seed companies and Kaua Coffee, are using tons of restricted use pesticides, and 18 tons a year. And so I started looking at these pesticides, and these binders over here, those are copies of labels. Some of the labels are 100 pages long, and these pesticides, atrazine, paraquat, and others, some of these are banned. Most of them are banned in other countries, and they're really, really dangerous things. You need a federal permit to use them. And then I found out they're using experimental pesticides. And then the more I talked to the community, the more I realized I had to do something as a council member. The county of Kauai needed to step up to look after the interests of the people and the environment. And so we introduced this bill, and it's called Bill 2491. And it does a few things. And just let me explain those few things for a second. And then if you have questions, just let me know.
Okay.
First of all, it requires disclosure. It basically just requires companies, large companies only, if you use over a certain amount of restricted use pesticides. And again, restricted use, these are not pesticides you can buy in Ace Hardware or Walmart or something. These are really tightly controlled. If you're using these, then you have to report them. You have to tell the community what you're using. You have to tell us once a year what chemicals you're using, how much you're using, and where you're using them at. You have to post signs that say I'm getting ready to spray tomorrow. It's to warn the public, because these are dangerous chemicals. So disclosure is a big part of it. People talk about, well, won't this hurt small farmers? And if small farmers don't use these chemicals, that's one thing I found was that when I looked at the data, that small farmers don't use them, only big companies. And then there are buffer zones. The bill says, okay, number one, you have to disclose what you're using, and to me that sounds reasonable. Number 2, there's a buffer zone. You can't spray these chemicals next to schools or hospitals or houses or sensitive environmental areas. The third component, it bans open air testing of experimental pesticides and experimental GMOs. Okay, so regular pesticides they would spray like they spray today, but experimental stuff that is not approved to spray in the open environment, they can only do that within an enclosed area like a greenhouse or something like that. Again, it sounds reasonable. When I speak to the companies, most of them say we're not experimenting with pesticides anyway. I did find that 2 companies, Syngenta and Pioneer, have experimental permits. And we want to make sure that those experiments are done in a way that protects people and the environment. And the same with genetically modified organisms. If you're experimenting with them, that means if these are not approved for release into the environment, then you do it in a greenhouse. Okay, it's not saying you can't do it, it's just saying you have to do it in a way that protects the environment. So that's the open air ban. And then we asked the county to do an environmental impact statement. Environmental impact statement basically is just a study. What are the impacts? A lot of people are worried. We had 30,000 sea urchins die on the west side in the nearshore waters. 30,000 sea urchins. We have people that are sick. People think that we have a lawsuit, 200 people suing Pioneer Corn. And so a lot of people feel like this operations of these companies are hurting the environment, hurting their health. But we really don't know. We know that they're using dangerous chemicals, and we know that they're experimenting with pesticides and GMOs, but we really don't know what those impacts are. So this bill says the county should look at these activities and do an environmental impact statement to determine what the truth is. So do we have something to be afraid of or not? And it's an independent study. It's done all the time in other areas for hotels and stuff like that. What are the impacts? What are the health impacts? What are the environmental impacts? What are the economic impacts? And so that study, it's a very comprehensive study. It might take a year, it might take 2 years to do. And the bill says, in the meantime, while we're doing the study, let's do a moratorium. Let's just take a deep breath, and the companies can keep doing what they're doing, but they can't expand. No new companies can come in. And so that's the moratorium component. And then that's really about it. You know, there's penalties provisions, there's a permitting process. Once you determine the impact, then you issue permits to let the companies operate. So there's a lot of misconceptions, but really it's about the right to know. It's about the right to know what chemicals are being used in our community and what those impacts are. Mm-hmm. And I believe myself that we're entitled to that, to know that. So that's a quick overview of the bill. Did you have questions or comments or anything at all?
Yeah, I've got a lot of questions.
Saul Khan, what question do you have?
Well, number one, I got my boy on me, and he's my number one concern. And if I'm living here and there's GMO cornfields or soy fields or whatever fields they want to do, they're planning on doing, and they're spraying around him, I'm just afraid he's going to get sick. And that's my number one concern as a parent, obviously. I just want to, how do I know my kid's safe or not? I don't feel he is.
And you know, that's a lot of other people asking similar questions. And that's if you read the labels, and I've spent hours reading these labels, and clearly they say don't use these around young children. The American Academy of Pediatrics did a study just recently, and they said the most vulnerable population is young children. And so I agree with you. We have a duty to look out for them. Fortunately, with this bill, several of our local doctors have stepped up, pediatricians, my children's pediatrician have stepped up and are supporting the bill. Because we don't know. And sometimes those impacts are what they call multi-generational or intergenerational.
Okay.
They don't occur for years and years. You know, small doses of toxic substances over time. You know, Waimea Canyon School, there was an incident there, a couple of incidents where kids got sick. You know, that's why this bill is so important, you know, really. Because it basically says we have the right to know what the impacts on your son will be. Mm-hmm. We have the right to know what the impact on our community is. And right now we don't know.
Okay.
These companies can spray right outside our window if they own the property, mm-hmm. without regard to letting me know or letting the homeowners know right now under existing law. As a parent, you don't have the legal right to ask them what they're spraying.
That's ridiculous.
Or to get an answer, I should say. It is ridiculous. And hopefully we can change that in our community. Where at the minimum, you will know what they're spraying and you will know what the expected impacts are.
I've heard that on the labels, a lot of these pesticides say they're not allowed to be sprayed near school children, but it seems like they are being sprayed around school children, and it's against the law to actually spray it around these kids. So how are they getting away with spraying these pesticides that say you're not allowed to even spray them around kids or people in general? I don't get it.
I don't get it either. And because the information is not available to us, we don't know. And I'd like to think that they're not bad people out there in the fields working. You know, they're people doing their jobs. Mm-hmm. But things happen. You know, the label clearly says this stuff is not supposed to drift. And you know, in Hawaii, it might be calm here for 5 minutes, and all of a sudden the trade winds kick in, mm-hmm. and it drifts. So I think drift happens. Drift is against the law, pesticide drift. But it's very hard to determine where that drift came from and that kind of thing. And so this bill establishes buffer zones. So it's saying you can't spray next to a school. Right now it's at 500 feet as a proposal. And some would say that's not far enough because sometimes the drift will drift for miles. But yeah, I think we need to take the basic steps to provide some basic protection for our community. Some of these pesticides have been studied in terms of, there's recommendations in the books about how to apply them and whatnot, but nobody has studied the impacts of 22 different restricted use pesticides, 18 tons on our island, sprayed day after day after day, 6 days a week. So those studies have not been done, and we owe it to ourselves, to our community, to do those studies. I think the concerns are valid. I mean, any parent would feel the same way, I think. There was a doctor, an obstetrician at KVMH on the west side, who testified in support and said he has patients that come to him, pregnant women, complaining of symptoms or concerned about it, and he doesn't know what to test for because he can't find out what chemicals are being sprayed.
Yeah, that's the other thing. If you got pregnant women around and they're breathing in these chemicals for their unborn children, that's scary.
It is. And
I feel so bad for them.
The data,
for the mothers.
The EPA and those guys will say there's certain minimum levels that are acceptable. Okay, and I would argue with that myself. But the minimum levels day after day after day, there's a cumulative effect. And when you do an environmental impact statement, there's a couple of concepts. They talk about cumulative impacts and secondary impacts. And those haven't been measured. You know, they may have tested in rats and mice and whatnot, but long-term cumulative impacts, small doses over time, 20 years in our community has not been tested. Tiana, did you have a question?
Yeah, and through my own understanding of chemicals and through my own personal experience growing up in this time of highly used chemicals in our society, it just concerns it. I'm afraid of my ability to even have children. And I have friends that I grew up with in Waimea who are married and don't see any connection to any of it, haven't looked into it, but she's been trying to get pregnant and she can't get pregnant. She hasn't looked into why, but she hasn't, you know, it's a mystery, really, you know, and my sister had her second premature baby, you know, and it's concerning to me because I would like to have that ability to have kids. And my understanding of these chemicals, they're messing with the hormone system as well as possible carcinogens. And cancer takes 10 years. My question, I guess, with that is, when did they start spraying these restricted use pesticides on our island? How long ago was it?
You know, people will say that they've been doing it for a long time. The cane companies did it, the sugar plantations and the pineapple fields sprayed them, and now this is a continuation of that. Hawaii and the plantation, big agribusiness, has a very bad history with pesticides. The heptachlor incident years ago, before you were born, they banned local milk because heptachlor got in the milk. There are chemicals in the soil all around the island, arsenic and other atrazine and stuff, that they call them legacy chemicals from DDT, and just chemicals they've used over time. So that's the troubling part, is our society has come to expect that it's okay to have a little bit, and it just adds up. And this bill, unfortunately, doesn't keep that from happening, but at least it provides the information that you need to make a good decision, and your doctor needs, and you as a parent needs. And the companies are fighting it tooth and nail, and I'm trying to explain to them, this does not keep you from spraying those chemicals. This just lets us know what you're spraying and keeps it away from schools and hospitals. And you know, with knowledge comes power. The more information we have, the better choices we can make. And the fact that they won't give us the information is even more reason why the county should step forward and say, no, it's a law, you have to tell us.
So the companies mentioned that it is public record, the information and what they're spraying annually, and I've heard that you've said you have asked them and you were turned away and not given the information, right. And then you had to go through the Department of Agriculture. How long did it take you to get that information? And
you know, when you mentioned that the companies said it's public record, and I smiled, and it's not a happy smile, okay, because the companies aren't entirely truthful with me as a council member or with the public. The companies will say it's public record. What they won't say is those public records are almost impossible to get. Okay, so I spent months as a council member making inquiries to the Department of Agriculture, and the county spent several $100s to get the first pieces of information. And that was only on restricted use pesticides. And it doesn't tell us where they sprayed it. It tells you what they purchased during a certain year and how much. And we have no idea at all what general use pesticides. So 18 tons make up maybe 20%, maybe 30% of all the pesticides they use. So all I know about is 18 tons is 20 or 30%. I don't know about the 70 or 80%, which would be the glyphosates of the world and the Roundup and all those other ones. So they're more than likely spraying hundreds of tons of those. And I haven't been able to get that information. The companies, I met with them like I'm meeting with you now, the 4 representatives, and asked them, I said, are you experimenting with pesticides? And they told me, no, they're not. And I found out through my persistence with the Department of Ag that they are. And so I've requested 2 experimental use permits. It's taken me months to get those permits also, and I finally got them just a couple of days ago. But the information is not easily available to the public. A small portion of it is public information. It's very difficult to get, but the vast majority is not available.
Wait,
Yeah.
so you just said, I want to clarify this, that they met with you and said they were not using experimental
That's
use
correct.
pesticides,
Right.
but they are using experimental use,
Yes.
or they are not and just have the permits. I'm not sure.
Well, that's a good question. They said they are not experimenting with pesticides. The Department of Ag have given me 2 copies of permits they have to experiment with pesticides.
Okay.
I just recently got a copy of those permits, and it shows what they're allowed to do. What they're actually doing, I don't know because they won't tell me. And that's troubling. It was reported publicly by Pioneer that they don't spray atrazine on their cornfields anymore. They haven't done that in years. It was in a public media, the Civil Beat, and that's not true. And whether the big bosses aren't telling the little guys down the road what's really going on, I've had employees telling me, we're not experimenting. Well, I know they are, or they'll say we're using what every other farmer uses. I have the sales records for the entire county of Kauai for 3 years, and 99% of these restricted use pesticides are used by these 5 companies.
Wow.
Real farmers growing vegetables and watermelons and kale and whatever to eat do not use these pesticides.
So this bill isn't going to affect small farmers?
Not at all.
Not at all?
Not
a little
one
bit?
little bit, no. The small farmers, conventional farmers, use Roundup, and they use other herbicides to keep the weeds down.
Do they get these, sorry to interrupt,
That's
do
right.
they get these from, Ace Hardware or
Generally speaking, yes.
Home Depot?
Yeah, and maybe Brewer Chemical or whatever.
Okay.
But they're not restricted use. If they were using restricted, there would be a public record, which I found. And so it will not impact small farmers at all. Some people say, well, what about golf courses? What about the city and the state? They're spraying every day. The records again show that the city and the state, or the county and the state, does not use restricted use pesticides. They're using Roundup also, or different brands of Roundup. And a lot of people argue that's not good either, but it's not nearly as potent and as toxic as these restricted use chemicals are. Golf courses, a lot of people complain about, golf courses use a lot. Okay, we have 7 or 8 golf courses on this island. All of them combined use 50 pounds of restricted use pesticides.
Restricted.
Versus 18 tons that these 5 companies are using. And what happens to those 18 tons? Some will say they'll dissipate over time, they get in the soil, they run off into the ocean, they go into the air. The labels, I encourage people to read the labels. Some of these labels are 100 pages long. Out of the 22 pesticides restricted use, 8 of them have specific warnings about killing bees, about getting in, many of them are banned in Europe. There's warnings about, you have to wear protective gear, get into the water system. And the industry will say, well, we actually use less pesticides. And that's not true. It's not true in our community. I know that for a fact. Yes?
Didn't the EPA recently affirm that they knowingly passed pesticides with neonicotinoids they knew that it was dangerous and kills bees and allowed it to be passed anyways?
There's lots of incidents like that where things were passed without proper research. That's specific. I'm not as aware probably as I should be, but there's lots of incidents. The federal government itself did a reporting on the EPA and their effectiveness on analyzing and protecting the community from chemicals. and said they cannot do their job properly because the industry doesn't give them the information they need to make a decision. The same thing that's happening here locally is happening on a national level.
How much is Kauai coffee using as?
Kauai coffee is, they use mostly one restricted use pesticide. I think it's 3 brands of one chemical.
Specific.
And they use a lot. They use a lot, but they don't use the multitude of varieties.
Right.
And that's what's especially concerning is when you're using different ones on top of different ones. They are one of the 5 major users.
That's pretty concerning because if they do studies on these chemicals, they do them individually.
Right.
There's no study showing what the chemical mixtures could do to a person.
That's right. That's right. And you know, BT corn, the GMO products in general are usually fall into 2 categories. One is BT, and I can't say the scientific name, but it's putting an organism, a pesticide, into the corn itself. So when insects eat the corn, the insect dies because the insect is eating the pesticide from the leaves of the corn.
Well, I heard the insect's stomach ruptures. It just doesn't die. It actually makes the stomach rupture, right?
Exactly.
So if they're putting in an insecticide in corn, which is making this animal's stomach literally explode, and we eat this corn as well.
And that's what a lot of people don't understand the nature of genetic modification, genetic engineering. That it's not crossing one type of corn with another corn. It's crossing different species. You know, so in this case, a bacteria that's actually a pesticide and putting it into corn, and they call it BT corn.
Right.
And so the EPA regulates pesticides, and the Department of Ag and others regulate food. But BT corn is actually considered, by definition, a pesticide.
Right. And it's actually kingdoms that they're manipulating on the gene level. It's plant and bacteria and plant and animal.
Right.
They're kingdoms, which is species gene. You know, it goes up to the very top. That nature has specific blocks for that to not happen. It doesn't allow it in nature. You can't mate a bacteria and a corn. And it just concerns me to change the gene of something. Doesn't it make it something else? Wouldn't I? It's just my.
And I share those
common thought.
concerns, and a lot of people do. But this bill talks about impacts on Kauai, you know, and some people say, well, let's kick the companies out. We don't like them at all. This bill does not do that. You know, this bill says if you're going to do these kinds of experiments, you can keep doing them, but do them enclosed where these hybrid, or these new plants, these genetically modified things that aren't approved by the federal government to eat, can't get out. And that's all it does. The companies have, unfortunately, in my opinion, called wolf. They're saying, oh, if you do this, we're going to have to close down. And I can't understand that they're going to close because they have to tell us what pesticides are spraying, or they're going to close because they're not allowed to spray poison next to a school.
Right.
I don't understand where that fear is coming from. I think it's just a general, they don't want any regulation, and they don't want any regulation at all.
So has an environmental impact statement been done yet?
No environmental impact statement has been done on the impact of this industry in our community. There's not one in general that is required.
So they're spraying tons and 18 tons plus of poisons into our soil. It's going into our water, going on our kids in the schools, going on us, and there's no environmental impact statement.
There has not been. And the way the law is set up right now, they're treated like a regular farm. So if you're going to plant tomatoes or carrots, there's no environmental impact statement needed. And so that's where the problem is, that they're treated like regular farms when they're really industrial research kind of operations. They're not regular farms. What they're growing is not for human consumption. It's for cattle feed. 90%, they will tell you this. If you read their own literature, they'll say it's all for cattle feed. And you can't eat, it's not meant for people to eat. Yes.
Which, well, on that thought, it's for cattle feed, which then gets fed to humans.
Mm-hmm.
So if the cows are eating something that we're not supposed to eat, and then we eat the cows, I mean, where's the distinction in that.
And it's certainly not feeding the world, okay?
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of talk about, GMOs are feeding the world, and they're not. They're not feeding the world. And as you know, beef and cattle in general are not the way to feed the world. It consumes far too much resources, and poorer countries can't afford steak and Twinkies, as I say anyway, because corn syrup would be the other. And I think any person who looks at their health will realize that processed food is bad for you, and chemicals are bad for you. And we all recognize that, and we all eat processed food, most of us, and we all are around chemicals. And so to a certain extent we accept it. But in a situation like this, where there's such a high volume of these chemicals, and we don't even know what they are because they won't tell us, and we deserve the right to know.
So on that note, it's in our state constitution, right, that it is, our government's position to protect the health and life of our community and the environment. And how do you suppose you are able to do that, not knowing what to test for in the water, not knowing what to test for in the soil, or anywhere,
Yeah.
for that matter?
And you bring up the law. And I know the GMO companies, their lawyers are going to say we can't do what we want to do. They're going to say the county doesn't have the power and authority. And our state constitution says that we do. Our state constitution, Section 1, Article 11, says for the benefit of present and future generations, okay? Present and future generations, the state and its political subdivisions, that's the county, shall conserve and protect Hawaii's natural beauty and all natural resources, including land, water, air, etc. So the state constitution says we shall do it, and that's what the county is trying to do. And so we're trying to pass a bill to fulfill our constitutional mandate. And the attorneys for the GMO companies are trying to tell us we can't do this, and they don't want us to do it. And they actually, this past legislative session, attempted to have a law passed which would strip some of that power from the counties. The GMO companies sponsored a bill, Senate Bill 727, that took the power of the counties to protect health and life out of state law. That was they attempted to do that, Senate Bill 727. It actually deleted those words, health and life, from the county's responsibilities.
I'm glad that didn't go through.
It didn't go through, but it's totally outrageous
It is.
that anyone, for the purpose of business, to make more money, would attempt to take away the county's right to protect the health and life of the residents.
You
Yeah.
just said in the it's the state constitution that says they're in charge of the health and the health of the people, and also the county. Why hasn't the state done anything?
That's a good question. A lot of people will say that's a state's responsibility. It's the federal government's responsibility. The state doesn't see this. The state as a whole doesn't see this as a big issue. And I believe it's because this is not happening everywhere in the state. It's not happening in McCully, or in Hawaii Kai, or in Kailua, or in Eva Beach, or
True.
even on the Big Island. They're growing papayas, but nowhere else do you have 15,000 acres of land dominated by GMO companies, corn, spraying 18 tons of restricted use pesticides, another 100 tons day after day after day of general use pesticides. So this is about Kauai, really. This is about impacts in our community. It's not about whether GMOs are good or bad. I mean, we all have opinions on that, but this is about what are the actions and activities of these companies doing that impacts our children and our rivers and streams and our environment here. And that's why it's up to us. And there's 7 members in the Kauai County Council. It takes 4 people to pass a bill. Councilmember Bynum, I'm thankful he's co-sponsoring this with me. And I'm hopeful and confident that a majority of members on the council will see that this is important and not let the unfounded fears that are being promoted by these big companies, the legal fears, we're going to sue you, they're telling us, this is going to cost us jobs, all these fears that are unfounded. This simply asks for the right to know. What are you using out here in our community, and how does that impact us?
I understand that EIS are expensive, And is it in the county? I mean, does the county even have the money to be able to conduct something like that? How would that be?
That's a good question. You know, people ask, well, isn't this a big job, a big regulatory burden for the county? Isn't it going to be very expensive? And it's certainly not cheap. You know, environmental impact statements might be $1 million, it might be $2 million, but it's about priorities. Okay, what are our priorities? Are health and safety? The county loses $1 million a year on Waialua Golf Course. Okay, $1 million a year on Waialua Golf Course. You know, we spend a lot of money on a lot of things because they're our priorities. And I think the county needs to make the health and safety and the protection of the environment a priority and settle this issue for our community. It's not going to go away. People, unless we do an independent, comprehensive, and spend the money and time, people are going to continue being worried. This tension in the community is going to remain. We need to take control of it. In terms of overall regulation, it's not that big a deal. Again, it's just disclosure, buffer zone. There's only 5 companies we're dealing with. So maybe one person could manage this, maybe 2 county employees at the most could manage this. And it's $200,000 a year, and we're entitled to charge these companies permitting fees to pay for their regulation. So we just pass the cost on to them. It's not complicated. We don't need scientists. We're not going to be measuring chemicals to figure out. It's buffer zones and disclosure.
Can you use the, I don't know, tax money that they pay or something to pay for the EIS?
Good question.
It's going to the state anyway, right?
Yeah.
So
the bill is written so taxes directly attributed to those companies can be used to pay for it.
Okay.
And of the 15,000 approximate acres they now farm, the 6,000 acres or so is state land. It's public lands, ceded lands, crown lands. And those are leased at very low rates from the state. And the companies have not been paying taxes on those lands, and they should have been.
6,000 acres?
6,000 acres.
Wow.
And so the county...
For how many years?
For 5 or 6 years, some of them. We're only able to bill them for 2 years. But as a result of this information, this research I've been doing, we discovered they hadn't been paying their taxes. And I'm sure they will say it was a mix-up, they didn't mean to, but we're going to be billing them for back taxes of about $150,000 or so. So those funds can be used to help pay for this. Wow. You know, Salt, somebody has to pay, yeah? At the end, there's a
Someone's
price to
got to pay, and I know the county...
whether it's paying to clean up the soil, or paying to clean up the water, or pay for healthcare costs, and it shouldn't be us.
No, if they're the ones poisoning the land and dumping everything in there, I mean, the rehabilitation of that land seems like it'd be more expensive, and I've seen from the sugarcane, and I've seen now the GMO cornfields, all the plastic tubing as well, just ripped up and put in, littered in the soil, and not to mention all the chemicals they're putting in now. I mean, that seems like that's going to be expensive once the land's dead and you can't grow anything anymore. That's right. Scary.
Especially on public lands and even private lands. Okay, examples, Kilauea. Okay, the sugarcane companies left Kilauea how many years ago? 30 years ago or so. The state just found a pesticide mixing plant in a residential area in Kilauea and did the investigation. The soil was toxic, arsenic, I believe.
Wow.
So they had to spend state money to go clean out all the soil around these houses, put cement in the ditches so the soil, so it wouldn't keep leaching in the groundwater, and then pay to haul that soil away. And those companies are long gone. You know, they've been gone for a long time. And unfortunately, that's the history of big corporations in many ways, whether it's tobacco or asbestos or DDT, or there's a long list of things that we were told years ago were, don't worry, it's safe, you can trust us. And at the end of the day, we realize that's not the case. I mean, there's a lot of good that comes out of technology, you know, and I think we should embrace it, but we should be careful.
Bringing it back to the schools, I see on one of the pesticides they use here, the 22, the lorsban, I saw a glimpse of the label of lorsban, and it was saying that it cannot be found it cannot be found on anywhere else where it is applied. And is it true that they found lorsban detected in the air samples at Waimea Middle Canyon School? I
believe they found chemicals contained within lorsban at Waimea Canyon School. And it's an interesting story, actually, because the tests were done 2 years after the incident. So it's a long time after the incident. And they detected small amounts of this chemical. 3 chemicals, actually, that they found that were not found in Hanalei school. Hanalei was a control. So they found 3 chemicals related to that shouldn't have
Wait,
been
test is done 2 years after the incident?
Yes.
Why is, I mean,
it's just the way, by the time funding and by the time it got done, and so it's not really a good test relating to the incident. But it tested the air, and they found 3 small levels of 3 different chemicals that were related to pesticides. And the people doing the study and the Department of Agriculture and the seed companies said, well, these limits are way below what California says is okay. And so it's no big deal. And nobody really posed the question of, well, why are they there in the first place? You know, why is it okay to have a little bit of a really bad thing? We don't want any of a really bad thing. And why do we trust California limits? What about our own limits? And it comes of, the more you look into it, you find out that this chemical is from this pesticide, and the only way for it to get there is to drift. And the law says, the label says it's not supposed to drift. So, but it did. And this is one test. But what about right after the incident, or what about all this other times, other tests? And so it really begs the question of control, the need for buffer zones, and this acceptance by government, by institutions, that a little bit of poison is okay. And as we all go through life, we're realizing we don't want a little bit of poison. You know, we want to eat good food, we want to take care of our children, we want to be healthy. But that chemical should not have been there. Even if it was a small amount, it should not have been there. And the only way for it to get there was through pesticide drift. To try to determine which company or which time or how it happened would be very difficult.
So how far does the drift go? I mean, keep saying pesticide drift. Is it
It can go
100
for
feet?
miles.
Is it miles?
It can go for miles. The labels say do not allow it to drift. It cannot be applied during conditions that will allow it to drift. So a good applicator will do it only when he's supposed to do it. He or she is supposed to do it. But we all know that you can't always, just because it's still right now doesn't mean it's going to be still in an hour from now. The labels talk about this phenomenon they call invection. And I've had other people talk to me about this, and I said, oh, this is some internet myth or something. But it's true. The labels warn about invection. On a hot day, a day like today, it's really hot, and the air's still, depending on the droplet size of the pesticide that you're spraying, it will rise up. Okay, it doesn't blow, it rises up, the heat's rising. So the air's rising, and then it floats along the top, and it could go miles and then float back down.
So do we have is there a way to measure how much actually goes into the soil, how much actually goes into the air, and how long that takes and how long it stays in there? Do we have any measurements of those for all these 22 pesticides I can barely pronounce?
The individual pesticides have been tested and studied under certain circumstances.
Okay.
And so there are, depending on the soil, it's really complicated stuff. Depending on the soil condition, if it's clay soil, or if it's sandy soil, or if it's, you know, the water table, there's a lot of variables. Some states that have certain kind of soils won't let you spray certain things. An environmental impact statement will help a lot, because it'll look at, okay, what are we using? Okay, we're using these chemicals. Where are we using them? What conditions? Are there streams? What's the soil like? And we'll do some proper analysis of this. And it's not going to be a magic bullet, but it will give us the best information we could possibly have to make good decisions.
Well, it seems absurd to have this much poison sprayed into our soils and going into our air and have no environmental impact statement done. It's absurdity. It's crazy. I mean, of course you want to find out what's going on, right?
Yeah.
I don't get it.
And that's why we're trying to change it.
Okay.
You know, these companies operate under the law that is in place. So they are not breaking the law. They are operating, that I know about. You know, they're operating under the law that allows them to operate. And what we're saying as a community, and what I'm saying with this bill, is the law needs to be changed.
But they are breaking the law because they found Lorsban, right? Next in schools.
Right.
Or at least the chemicals that make up Lorsban.
Well, yes, one could argue circumstantially it looks like someone broke the law, but to actually say who did it, when they did it, is just very difficult. Like I talked about infection. Okay, that Loras band could have come from, we don't know where.
Okay.
But the bottom line is this is serious stuff. And the only people that can deal with it, that can match the resources of these large companies, is government. I mean, the people, and they have, and you both have been involved, can speak up and raise the alarm, but government is the only one that have the law and lawyers and money to speak on behalf of the people and to protect the people as best they can. Again, it's not a silver bullet, but we can do a much better job than we're doing right now.
What about Monsanto? Sorry. We keep hearing Monsanto, 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 and I know we have Syngenta, DuPont.
Right. Monsanto
Pioneer.
is not here, as far as I know.
They're not here.
They were here and they left. They're in Oahu and on Molokai.
Okay.
But I don't know why they left. But it's my understanding they're not here. There's 3 companies, Pioneer, Syngenta, Dow, and BASF.
And they're doing the same thing as Monsanto, though, is what my
They're
understanding
doing
is.
very much the similar things.
Do they work together?
They're competitors, I believe.
Okay.
They are all in the chemical and seed business. They produce new pesticides and new chemicals, and they produce seeds, they research. Out of the 4 companies, I believe Syngenta and Pioneer are the largest ones. They have the most acreage. BASF and Dow have relatively small operations. And some are experimenting with pesticides, some are not. They're all using restricted use pesticides. But really we don't know because they won't tell us. And again, it comes back just to get good information. And I'm hopeful that when the community does their homework and they'll realize, they'll read the bill or they'll talk to people and they'll realize that this bill, 2491, is there to help protect the health and community and environment. And it is not, it's not going to affect small farmers. It's not going to put anybody out of business or cost jobs. But it will increase the health and protection of our community. With buffer zones, 500 feet from a school is not a long ways.
Seems like that's not long enough.
Exactly.
If you say drift miles.
And maybe at the end of the day, it could be greater. And disclosure, so I tried to, working with Councilmember Bynum and working with people in the community, working with lawyers, tried to craft something that is as comprehensive as we could get within our legal authority to protect the community as best we can. Yes.
The moratorium, so is that in place right now while this is up for voting?
Not technically.
Oh.
Okay. The moratorium, the bill is written so there's a start date for a moratorium. Okay, the start date is after that point you can expand. Okay, the start date was the day this bill was made public. Okay, but it only really means anything if we pass a bill into law. So the companies can continue to grow and expand if they want to now, but when we pass this into law, then they shouldn't have done it. So it's public notice to them. It's public notice to them that we intend to do this, and so you should not invest money expanding your business.
And to clarify, so if it does get passed and the moratorium gets put into place, it's only stopping them from expanding until a proper EIS is put into place.
Yes, and a permitting process. Right. So I talked about 15,000 acres. That's a round number the industry uses that they have. Okay. They have gotten approvals to farm a certain amount of that acreage. A lot of the acreage might be hilly or ravines or stuff they can't really farm at all. So they have permission right now as we stand to farm, I'll just pick a number, 10,000 acres that they can do what they want. So during the moratorium they can still do that 10,000 acres. They just cannot go lease new lands in St. Kalia or expand their permits, or a new company, a 6th company can't come in. But they can keep doing their business, and that's why when they say that it's going to cause them to close down, that it won't. They can keep doing their business. And I've been told that the industry has told many people in the past they don't plan on expanding anymore. They've got enough. I mean, they've got 15,000 acres of the best farmland in the county of Kauai. So the moratorium will not make them shut down. The buffer zones are gradually kick in, and so that will have an impact on their business. But with all the land they have, they could just back up their crops.
I had a friend in the hospital, and we just so happened to be positioned in a hospital room that was facing the airport. And I looked out the window, and the cornfield were maybe a few hundred yards away from the hospital and the town. And what concerns me is that they're spraying whatever they're spraying, and we don't know. And they're situated near the airport on the windward side of the island where trade winds are blowing. So it takes the wind from the ocean and blows directly into the hospital and the Lihue community with the cornfield downwind from them. That's really concerning to me, and with so close to our hospital, which is one of our only chances of.
And there's people in there with immune deficiencies. There's people with cancer. There's people on life support. There's babies. There's pregnant women. And the EIS is intended to identify these these types of situations, and in the permitting process, when they apply for a permit, they would say, well, you can't be upwind of a hospital. You have to be so far away. You have to do a wind dispersion study. That's the problem with Waimea, with the valley. They're up there on the plateau, and the wind is just blowing that pesticide-laden dust into the community day after day after day.
So without an EIS, they can do whatever they want, basically.
Well, without a permitting process, they can do whatever they want. EIS just identifies impacts. It doesn't make them do anything. A permitting process will say you cannot do it next to a school or hospital besides a buffer zone. Right now, there's no permitting process. Like a regular farm, you don't need a permit. You don't need a permit to grow vegetables or whatnot. But this is different. This is not a regular farm. This is an industrial operation.
Like she was saying about the hospital, we have all these chemicals, and let's say people are starting to get sick, like I am hearing they are. How do the doctors, the nurses, the fire department, all the first responders, how do they know what to treat for, what to look for, if they won't even tell us what chemicals they're using? That doesn't make sense.
It's exactly why we're doing the bill. And I'm very happy, and I think I mentioned this earlier, we have probably so far a dozen physicians, MDs, that have been here for 30, 40 years, that at major positions of responsibility in our community, who are stepping up and supporting this bill for that very same reason. They know, because the studies show that this is not good for people. It's certainly not good for small children and pregnant women. And they know that they can't do their jobs unless they are aware of what chemicals are being used. And so I'm really happy and thankful that the medical community in our island is stepping up. And again, these are people, probably your doctors when you were born, and certainly my children, who are taking responsibility for this. So.
You mentioned at the public hearing that the Hawaii Teachers Association is supporting us.
The Hawaii State Teachers Association offered testimony and support. They're very concerned. Waimea Canyon School is just one example. There's other schools that are impacted. Kauai Community College is impacted. Island School is right there by the, but the teachers have stepped up, and they're very supportive. Local 5, a hotel workers union, has stepped up and is supporting it. There's a long list of people, small business owners, community leaders, who are saying that this is a reasonable approach and we need to do something. It's a problem in our community we need to deal with as a community. And this is a reasonable way to do it. And again, it's unfortunate that the pushback has been so strong, but I'm confident that we'll be able to make some good stuff happen. So, thank you all for coming. Did you have any other questions before we?
So just to clear up, this ordinance is not bankrupting the company. It's not going to cause them to shut down in any form, and it won't take anybody's jobs away from them.
No, I mean, I would clarify that. The bill is purposely designed and written so it won't do that. Okay, if a company packs up and moves away because we won't let them spray chemicals next to a school or a hospital, then they should leave. They're not the kind of company I want in my community, quite frankly. Or if they're not willing to tell us, and that's going to cause them to move away, but they won't. They've got tens of millions of dollars invested. They're still going to do business. This will cost them a little bit of money in compliance, but they're multi-billion-dollar international companies. But it will not cause them to close up and move away.
What's the best way to let the council members of the state know our concerns about this?
Right now, I would say council testimony at kauai.gov. That's the email address to send in your thoughts and testimony on this bill. Just council testimony at kauai.gov. And if whatever your position is, it's democracy. Send a letter to that or an email. It could be short, could be long. If you have a personal relationship with a council member, I would call them up and say, this is important to me, and I hope you're supporting it too. And talk to your friends and neighbors. A lot of people, feel the same way that I feel, and I think you feel too, that this is important, but they're shy and they're not willing to speak out. But if others speak out, then it gives them more courage to do the same. They think, well, GMO, that's kind of weird, and stuff, and they don't know that much about it. And I would just explain to them, this is not about GMO, this is about the impacts on our island. And the GMO companies are responsible for those impacts. But we need to know what they are, and we need to study them. And that's the bottom line. It's nothing to be afraid of, it's something we should embrace to make us a healthier, better community.
And
I
this
agree.
is the restricted use pesticides, not general use, which general use includes Roundup and all that you can buy from the stores.
Right.
That's not included. And small farmers, unless they have a permit, a restricted use permit, are then allowed to use restricted use. But other than that, it's just these main
Right, it's 5 companies.
that have it.
These 5 companies will have to report their general use also because they're using so much of it. But homeowners, small farmers, landscape companies, no one else will have to be impacted by this at all, unless they start using large amounts of restricted use pesticides. Because those are the worst of the worst. I mean, they really are. They're the ones that, again, the warning labels are 100 pages long, some of them.
Isn't this gonna, sorry, I know we might be wrapping up here, but won't this affect the tourist industry as well here? I mean, I would think that the tourism industry would be freaking out over this as well. I mean, all of our land is becoming just poison land, it seems like, and all of our air is becoming toxic air around the perimeter of the entire island almost.
Well, the South especially, because we've got our higher end hotels and timeshares there, and so a lot of people tourism spends a lot of money out on the south side, and they're surrounded by the cornfields.
And I get emails every day as a council member from people, visitors, who have heard about this as ground zero and are saying, I'm concerned, I don't want to come here anymore. And we've spent, God knows how much money attracting eco visitors, people who appreciate the environment, who want to hike and want to go in the streams and want to go to Nepali. And those are the kind of people who are concerned about this stuff. And I believe that the United States and the world in general, certainly people that can afford to travel, are more aware and more concerned about their diet and about the environment than ever before. And so they are going to be very concerned, so it's going to affect tourism, it will. And it's one reason I would like to deal with this issue as a community, deal with it responsibly, and stop the controversy, if you would, stop the negative impacts, and so we can move on, and live healthier and be better informed and be good for tourism, good for all of us. Not to mention for real farmers. I mean, for people that want to farm food that we can eat, that they deserve a shot at these resources, the state resources too. The 6,000 acres of state land that are being used on crops that we can't eat, and money that doesn't stay here. And I think we need to keep our eye on the prize, and think about this is a garden island. Right. And what does that mean? Does that mean 18 tons of restricted use? Is that the kind of garden we want? No. We want a garden our kids can run around in, right? You want a garden that your kids can run around and pull weeds and play and have fun. Not one that you have to put signs that say keep out and fences to keep people out because it's poisonous.
It doesn't seem safe, number one. And number two, it just doesn't seem like a sustainable business model for agriculture. It seems like the more you're killing, and then you have to add more poison. And then I hear there's these things called super weeds too. And you have to add more poison. And when does that end? how long can this last? How long can this go on for?
As long as the companies can develop new chemicals to kill new weeds, and that's the sad reality of it, that some believe technology is going to, buy our way out of this. I don't think so.
It's like death upon death upon death.
Yeah.
There's no positive there.
Yeah, no, I agree.
That's sad.
I agree. But, we live in a special place, and I think we can find our way through this.
Yes.
So, again, this has been a great discussion. We have.
Thank you,
It's been
Mr.
good.
User, very much.
Thanks. So,
I'd just like to thank you so much for having the courage and and the passion to do your job to your utmost, to the highest. Taking care of the health and community and serving our state in that sense of really wanting the best for our community. And so I'd like to thank you for introducing this ordinance. And it is a simple first steps into just finding out what's happening and how you can better protect us by getting this information from these companies, and really just trying to work with these companies. You can still do business here, but hey, I know you care about the community too, so let's work together and figure out the safety of it all.
Do it in a responsible manner.
Yeah.
Thank you. I do
Thank
what
you.
I do because we're all in this together.
Let's keep our kids safe. That's my main goal.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.